The moment my grandson Tyler snickered at the wedding ring quilt I'd spent 11 months stitching for him and his new bride, something inside me, something that had bent and bent for decades, finally snapped. I stood there in my own living room, the quilt I'd poured my heart into draped across my arms, as my 3 grandchildren and their spouses struggled to hide their disappointment behind polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "It's really traditional, Grandma Eleanor," Tyler said, exchanging a look with his wife Brittany that he thought I couldn't see. At 73, my eyesight might need reading glasses, but I could still spot condescension from across the room. "We really appreciate the thought," Brittany added, not reaching to touch the quilt I held. "But our apartment is very modern, all whites and grays, very minimalist." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the quilt, nearly 8 pounds of hand-selected fabrics, over 400 hours of work, and 5 generations of family tradition suddenly heavy in my arthritic hands. My daughter Jennifer, their mother, shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, but said nothing. She'd long ago traded her childhood appreciation for handmade things for a world of gleaming surfaces and items ordered with one-day shipping. "Well," I said, carefully refolding the quilt along its original creases, "it's just a gift. You can store it away if you prefer." Tyler's sister Madison glanced up from her phone just long enough to say, "Maybe you could sell it online, Grandma. Vintage stuff is actually trending right now." She went back to scrolling before she could see the flinch I couldn't quite hide. "Vintage? Like me? A relic?" I placed the quilt back in the cedar chest I'd brought it in, my fingers lingering on the fabric pieces from my late husband Frank's favorite flannel shirt, scraps from Jennifer's childhood dresses, even a small square from my own mother's wedding dress. Each piece told a story none of them had ever bothered to ask about. "Anyone want more coffee?" I asked, rising slowly. My hip protested. The barometer was dropping outside, which meant the early October rain would be turning to sleet by evening. My youngest grandchild Emma nodded without looking up from her phone. Her husband murmured something about having it black. None of them moved to help me to the kitchen, though they'd all seen me wince. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter and took a deep breath. Through the doorway, I could hear them chatting, their voices suddenly animated now that the awkward moment of the quilt had passed. "Did you see the apartment complex they're building downtown?" Madison was saying. $2,000 a month for a studio, but the amenities are amazing." "Their business model is genius," Tyler replied. "Everything's designed around a subscription model now. Our coffee table actually has a built-in wine service you can subscribe to." I poured the coffee mechanically, my mind drifting to my own childhood in rural Tennessee. My grandmother teaching me to quilt on her back porch, the smell of honeysuckle thick in the air. "Every stitch carries your intention," she'd told me. "When you wrap someone in a quilt you made, you're wrapping them in your love." What would she think of a world where love came with a monthly subscription fee? I arranged the coffee cups on a tray, added a plate of the spice cookies I'd baked that morning, and carried it all back to the living room. The conversation halted abruptly as I entered. Jennifer gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, we were just talking about your house. It's really too big for you now, and those stairs can't be good for your hip." And there it was, the real reason for this rare Sunday visit. I set the tray down carefully on the coffee table and resumed my seat, taking my time to respond. "My hip is managing just fine, thank you," I said, passing the coffee cups around. "Dr. Winter says I'm doing well for my age." "But you're all alone here," Jennifer pressed, "and the upkeep must be exhausting." "I have my garden, my quilting circle on Wednesdays, book club on Thursdays." I didn't mention the loneliness that sometimes pressed in at night when the house creaked and settled around me. They didn't want that burden. Emma looked up from her phone with sudden interest. "The property values in this neighborhood have gone up like 30% in the past 5 years. You could make a killing if you sold now." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the familiar bitterness ground me. The home they were so eager for me to sell was the one Frank and I had bought 51 years ago, where we'd raised Jennifer. Where Frank had built the garden beds with his own hands the summer before cancer took him. Where 4 decades of memories lived in every corner. "I'm not ready to sell," I said finally. Jennifer sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "Mom, be practical. You could get a nice little condo in one of those new senior communities. No maintenance, people your own age around." "People my own age," I repeated softly, as if I was a child who needed to be segregated with my own kind. I thought of my quilting circle May, who was 68, but also Sarah, who was only 42, learning to quilt after her divorce as a way to reclaim her creativity. The conversation moved on, as it always did, flowing around my objections like water around a stone. I found myself studying my grandchildren, wondering when they'd become strangers. When had Emma's bright curiosity transformed into this calculating assessment of property values? When had Tyler, who once spent hours in my garden digging for worms, become someone who saw no value in things made by hand? The visit lasted another hour, perfunctory and tense, before they all made excuses about traffic and evening plans. I hugged them at the door, these tall, beautiful young people who carried my blood but not my values, and promised to think about the senior living brochures Jennifer left on my coffee table. After they drove away, I stood in my doorway watching the October leaves skitter across my front lawn. The maple Frank had planted when Jennifer was born was blazing orange now, dropping its bounty across the grass. In my younger days, I would have been out there with a rake tomorrow, gathering those leaves for compost. Now I'd have to call the neighbor boy to help. Sighing, I locked the door and returned to the living room, where the cedar chest still sat open, the rejected quilt nestled inside. I ran my fingers over the careful stitches, remembering the evenings spent working on it while watching the news or listening to my audiobooks. Every few minutes, I'd think about how Tyler and Brittany would someday wrap their children in this quilt, how it would become an heirloom they'd treasure. I'd been naive. My eyes fell on the brochures. Jennifer had left glossy photos of smiling seniors playing pickleball and gathered around pristine dining tables. "Golden Sunset Acres," one announced, without a trace of irony. As if we were all just placidly waiting for the sun to go down on our lives. I picked up my phone and, after a moment's hesitation, called Sarah from my quilting circle. "Eleanor, I was just thinking about you," her warm voice answered. "How did the quilt gifting go?" I found myself telling her everything: the polite rejection, the conversations about selling my house, the sense that I'd become a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. "Oh, Eleanor," Sarah said when I'd finished, "I'm so sorry. That's heartbreaking." "I just don't know what to do with it now," I admitted. "The quilt, I mean. It was made specifically for Tyler and Brittany, with colors I thought would suit them." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said slowly, "my niece Casey just moved into her first apartment. She's 23, working at that new bakery downtown and taking night classes. She has absolutely nothing, and she's sleeping on an air mattress until she can afford a real bed." "Does she like quilts?" I asked, a small flicker of something not quite hope, but possibility stirring. "She grew up admiring the one I made for her mom," Sarah said. "She actually asked me to teach her to quilt someday when she has more time." I looked at the wedding ring quilt, its carefully chosen blues and creams that would now never grace Tyler and Brittany's bed. "Would you give me her address?" I asked. 2 days later, I stood on the porch of a slightly shabby apartment building on the edge of downtown, the cedar chest at my feet. My hip was complaining after the 3 flights of stairs, but I ignored it. I'd called ahead, so Casey was expecting me, though I hadn't told her why I was coming. When she opened the door, I was struck by how young she looked, not much older than Emma, with curly brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and flowers still dusting the front of her University of Tennessee sweatshirt. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Casey. Aunt Sarah said you were stopping by?" Her voice lifted in a question as she helped me maneuver the cedar chest into her tiny apartment. The place was indeed sparsy secondhand couch with a faded slipcover, a small table with mismatched chairs, and through the open bedroom door, I could see the air mattress Sarah had mentioned, covered with a jumble of blankets. "I brought you something," I said, suddenly feeling foolish. What if this girl was just like my grandchildren? What if handmade things meant nothing to her either? "It's a quilt I made. Sarah mentioned you didn't have much furniture yet, and winter's coming." I opened the chest and lifted out the wedding ring quilt, its colors catching the afternoon light streaming through Casey's single window. I heard her small gasp. "You're giving this to me? But it's amazing. Did you really make this?" Her voice held none of the polite disappointment I'd heard from Tyler. Instead, there was wonder as she reached out tentatively to touch the fabric. "Every stitch," I confirmed. "It's a wedding ring pattern. Traditional, but I think traditions exist for a reason." Casey carefully took the quilt from my hands, holding it up to examine the pattern more closely. "The stitching is incredible. And are these different fabrics all pieced together?" "This must have taken forever." "About 11 months, I admitted, but I enjoyed every minute." She looked at me over the top of the quilt, her eyes wide. "And you're just giving it to me? But we've never even met before today." I smiled, feeling something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "Sarah says you're interested in learning to quilt someday. Consider this inspiration. Or maybe just a warm blanket for now, until you can get a proper bed." Casey carefully folded the quilt and held it against her chest. I don't know what to say except thank you. "This is the nicest thing anyone's done for me since I moved here." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like some tea? I don't have much, but I did splurge on some good Earl Grey." I should have said no. My hip was aching and the drive home would be tiring, but something in this small, bare apartment felt more welcoming than my grandchildren's polished homes ever had. "I'd love some tea," I said. We sat at her little table, mugs of tea steaming between us, and talked. Really talked, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Casey told me about growing up in a small town, about her dreams of finishing her business degree while working at the bakery, about how lonely the city sometimes felt. "My mom wanted me to stay home, work at the local bank like she does," Casey explained. "But I wanted something different. Not that I don't respect her life, I do. She raised me on her own after my dad left." I nodded, understanding the complicated pull between generations. It's possible to forge your own path while still honoring where you came from, I said. "That's what the quilts mean to me. Taking scraps of the past and making something new, but still connected." Casey's eyes lit up. "That's exactly it. I don't want to reject everything traditional just because it's old. Some things are traditional because they work, because they matter." We talked until the light outside began to fade. I told her about Frank, about my own struggles as a young woman in the 1960s, trying to balance a career as a school librarian with motherhood. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions, drawing connections to her own life. When I finally stood to leave, Casey walked me to the door, the quilt still clutched in one arm. "Mrs. Patterson, would you?" She hesitated, then pushed on. "Would you maybe be willing to teach me to quilt sometime?" "Not right away. I know you don't even know me, but someday." I thought about my Wednesday quilting circle, about the empty chair since Marjorie had moved to Florida to live with her daughter. "We meet every Wednesday at my house," I said. 2 until 4. You'd be welcome any time." Her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Really? I have Wednesdays off from the bakery. I could bring pastries. They let us take the day-olds." That would be lovely, I said, meaning it. As I drove home through the gathering dusk, I felt lighter than I had in months. The cedar chest rode empty in my back seat, but my heart felt full. I thought about Casey wrapping herself in that quilt tonight on her air mattress. I thought about her fingers someday, learning to form the same stitches my grandmother had taught me. Something wasn't ending, I realized. It was continuing, just not in the way I'd expected. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment looking at my house. The house Jennifer and the grandchildren were so eager for me to sell. The porch light I'd left on glowed warmly against the encroaching night. Frank's maple dropped another cascade of leaves across the lawn as a breeze picked up. Tomorrow, I decided, I would call that service Jennifer had mentioned the one that helped seniors transition to smaller homes. Not because I was ready to move into Golden Sunset Acres, but because it was time to take stock, to decide what truly mattered to me in this next chapter. And if my family couldn't appreciate the traditions I valued, perhaps it was time to find people who could. Inside, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals over the years. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar and comforting. I thought about Casey in her sparse apartment, probably wrapped in my quilt by now, and felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in too long. Purpose. After dinner, I went to my sewing room, where 3 large plastic bins contained my fabric stash scraps saved over decades, each with its own memory attached. I opened the first bin and began to sort through the pieces, setting aside those that might work for a simple beginner's quilt, something Casey could manage as a first project. My phone rang as I was working, Jennifer's name flashing on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the 3rd ring. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that forced brightness she used when she wanted something. "I just wanted to check in. Did you look at those brochures?" "I did," I said, continuing to sort fabric with my free hand. "They're very nice." "Really?" The surprise in her voice was almost comical. "So you're considering it?" "I'm considering a lot of things," I said, "including what I want my life to look like going forward." "That's good," Jennifer said cautiously. "Tyler mentioned that you seemed upset about the quilt. You know they didn't mean to hurt your feelings, right? They just have a different aesthetic." I set down the fabric. I was holding a piece of the blue gingham Jennifer herself had worn as a child. "I know," I said. "People value different things. That's becoming very clear to me." Something in my tone must have alarmed her. "Mom? What does that mean?" "It means I've found someone who appreciates my quilting," I said. "A young woman who's just starting out. I gave Tyler's quilt to her." "You what?" Jennifer's voice rose. "Mom, that quilt was a family heirloom." "It wasn't an heirloom yet," I corrected her gently. "It would have become one if it had been valued and passed down. But since it wasn't wanted, I found someone who does want it." "I can't believe you just gave away something like that to a complete stranger," Jennifer said, her voice tight with disapproval. "She's not a stranger anymore," I replied. "And I'm teaching her to quilt. She's joining our Wednesday circle." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out. Finally, Jennifer sighed. "Mom, is this about the house? Are you trying to make some kind of point?" "No, Jennifer," I said, suddenly tired. "This isn't about making points. It's about finding connection. It's about making sure the things I value, the traditions, the skills, the stories don't die with me." "Nobody's asking those things to die," Jennifer protested. "We just think you'd be safer in a place with more support." "I'll consider the brochures," I promised, "but I'm also considering other options. I'll let you know what I decide." After we hung up, I sat among my fabrics feeling oddly at peace. The conversation with Jennifer would have usually left me anxious, defensive, worried about disappointing her. But something had shifted inside me. I picked up a piece of soft flannel remnants from a baby blanket I'd made for Emma 15 years ago and thought about how quickly time passed. How easy it was to wake up one day and find yourself pushed to the margins of your own family's story. But maybe that wasn't the only story I could be part of. I reached for my sketchbook and began to design a simple 9-patch quilt, something Casey could manage as a first project. As my pencil moved across the paper, I felt the familiar satisfaction of creation, of making something that would last. Outside, the October wind picked up, rattling the windows gently. Winter was coming, but for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to it. To Wednesday afternoons with warm tea and fresh pastries, to teaching young hands the stitches my grandmother had taught me, to passing on what mattered, even if it wasn't to the people I'd expected. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain against my bedroom window. My hip protested as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, but I pushed through the stiffness, determined to make the most of the day. I had preparations to make before Wednesday. As I made my morning tea, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Casey. "Mrs. Patterson, I slept with the quilt last night, and it was like being wrapped in a hug. I can't wait for Wednesday. Is there anything I should bring besides pastries? Any supplies to start learning?" I smiled as I typed back. "Just yourself and willing hands. I have everything else we'll need to get started." Setting my phone down, I looked around my kitchen tea cabinets Frank had built, the window over the sink that framed the garden like a painting. Jennifer was right about one thing. This house was too big for just me now, but the thought of leaving it felt less painful this morning. Because maybe home wasn't just these walls and this roof. Maybe home was also the traditions you carried, the skills you passed on, the connections you forged with kindred spirits. I sipped my tea and watched the rain make rivers down the windowpane, feeling the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Not as a problem to be managed, but as a woman with value still to give. And with that thought warming me more than the tea, I began to plan what I would teach Casey first when Wednesday finally arrived. Wednesday dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that made the world seem freshly polished. I spent the morning preparing for quilting circle, setting out my fabric bins and notions with more care than usual. I arranged chairs in a circle in the sunroom, where the natural light was best for detailed work. May had texted to say she was bringing her famous lemon squares. Sarah would arrive early to help set up the portable tables we used for cutting fabric. And Casey would be coming with day-old pastries from the bakery. At 1:30, Sarah's car pulled into my driveway. She helped me unfold the card tables, chattering about her grandson's soccer game as we worked. "Casey's really excited about today," she mentioned, smoothing a tablecloth over one of the tables. "She called me twice to make sure she didn't need to bring anything besides pastries. I think she's nervous about fitting in." "She'll fit in just fine," I assured her, though I felt a flutter of nerves myself. What if the other women weren't welcoming? What if Casey found the actual process of quilting tedious once she tried it? May arrived next, her silver hair freshly styled, carrying her lemon squares and the latest block for our group projected charity quilt for the Children's Hospital. "Who's this new person joining us?" she asked, settling into her usual chair by the window. "Sarah says she's quite young." 23, I confirmed. "She's Sarah's niece, just starting out on her own. I gave her Tyler's quilt." May's eyebrows shot up. "The wedding ring quilt? The one you worked on all year?" When I nodded, she let out a low whistle. "Well, I can't say I'm surprised after what you told us about their reaction. But that's quite a gift for someone you just met." "Sometimes you just know," I said simply. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock. I opened it to find Casey standing on my porch, her arms full with a pink bakery box and a reusable shopping bag. She dressed up a bit clean jeans without any tears, a blue sweater that brought out her eyes, her curly hair contained in a neater ponytail than when I'd first met her. I brought chocolate croissants and cinnamon rolls, she said by way of greeting, and some coffee from work. They were going to throw it out anyway. I hope that's okay? More than okay, I assured her, taking the bakery box. Come in and meet everyone. Casey followed me into the sunroom, her eyes widening as she took in the space, the wall of windows overlooking the garden, the shelves filled with fabric organized by color, the quilts draped over every available surface. This is beautiful, she breathed. It's like a fabric library. I laughed. Well, I was a librarian for 35 years, so maybe that's fitting. I introduced Casey to May and Sarah's quilting friends, Barbara, a retired nurse whose geometric quilts won ribbons at the state fair, and Luann, our newest member before Casey, who had taken up quilting after her husband died 3 years ago. We're so glad to have young blood, May told Casey, as she helped herself to a cinnamon roll. Most people your age think quilting is just for old ladies. Casey shook her head earnestly. That's so wrong. I mean, it's like the original upcycling, isn't it? Taking scraps and making something beautiful and useful. It's actually super sustainable. May and Barbara exchanged amused glances at Casey's earnestness, but I could see they were charmed. Sarah beamed proudly at her niece as she poured coffee into the mugs I'd set out. So, Eleanor, Luann said, are you going to start Casey on a 9-patch? That's how you taught me. I nodded, pleased that Luann remembered. I thought we'd begin with selecting fabrics today. The cutting and piecing can wait until she's sure she wants to commit. Oh, I want to commit, Casey said quickly. I've been watching YouTube tutorials since Sunday. I even practiced some stitches on an old pillowcase. Her enthusiasm made me smile. Well then, let's get you started with fabric selection. The first rule of quilting is to choose fabrics that speak to you, not just what matches your furniture. I led Casey to my fabric shelves, aware of the other women watching with interest. This was usually my favorite part of teaching someone new, seeing which colors and patterns drew them, what combinations they were naturally attracted to. These are all so beautiful, Casey said, running her fingers lightly over folded fat quarters. Did you use all these in quilts? Some, I said. Others I bought because they called to me, even if I didn't have a project in mind yet. My husband used to tease me about my fabric addiction. Casey pulled out a piece of emerald green cotton with tiny gold stars. This is gorgeous. Christmas fabric, I explained. But who says you can't use it year-round if you love it? For the next half hour, Casey and I selected fabrics for her first quilt, while the other women worked on their own projects, occasionally offering opinions or sharing stories about their first quilting attempts. I still have my first disaster tucked away in a drawer, Barbara admitted. The points don't match up, the binding is a mess, but I can't bear to get rid of it. My first quilt is on my son's bed, May said proudly. He's 47 now, and that quilt has been washed so many times it's practically tissue paper, but he won't let me replace it. Casey listened to these stories with rapt attention as she chose her fabrics: the emerald green with stars, a deep navy blue with silver pinstripes, a cream background with tiny gold flourishes, and several complementary solids. Are you sure about these? I asked. They're not typical beginner choices. Most new quilters gravitated toward pre-cut bundles in matching colors. Casey had chosen fabrics that would require more careful planning to work together. I'm sure, she said. They remind me of looking at the night sky during camping trips with my mom when I was little. Something in the way she said it touched me. This wasn't just a craft project to hair, it was already becoming a way to capture memory in fabric, just as it had been for me all these years. We spent the rest of the afternoon teaching Casey how to use the rotary cutter, always cut away from yourself, Barbara warned, and how to measure precisely for the 9-patch blocks she would be making. The quarter-inch seam allowance is sacred, May intoned seriously. Respect it, and your blocks will align perfectly. Casey took notes on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she made her first perfect cut with the rotary cutter, the entire room burst into applause, making her blush with pleasure. As 4 o'clock approached, the other women began packing up their projects. Casey helped me clear away the coffee cups and pastry crumbs, lingering after the others had left. "Thank you for today," she said, carefully placing her newly cut fabric squares into a Ziploc bag I'd given her. "I haven't felt this, I don't know, connected to something in a long time." "Quilting does that," I told her. "It connects you not just to the craft but to generations of women who came before us. My grandmother taught me on a back porch in Tennessee when I was just 12 years old." Casey's eyes lit up. "Will you tell me about her sometime? About how she learned?" "I'd be happy to," I said, touched by her interest. "Why don't you stay for dinner? Nothing fancy, just soup and sandwiches, but we could talk more." Casey accepted eagerly, helping me prepare a simple meal of tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. As we ate at my kitchen table, I told her about my grandmother Eliza, who had learned to quilt during the Great Depression out of necessity rather than hobby. She used to say that poverty taught her thrift, but quilting taught her that thrift could be beautiful. I recalled. She saved everything: flour sacks, worn-out shirts, even feed bags. Nothing was wasted. "That's amazing," Casey said. "My generation thinks we invented recycling, but women like your grandmother were doing it all along." I smiled, warmed by her understanding. Exactly. Though she would have found it strange that people now pay good money for brand new fabric just to cut it up and sew it back together again. Casey laughed at that. "When you put it that way, it does sound kind of crazy." As the evening wore on, our conversation drifted to Casey's own family. Her mother was a single parent who had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Her father had left when she was 3, had no memories of him. Mom did everything she could to give me a normal childhood, Casey said, tracing patterns on the tablecloth with her fingertip. But there were no extras, no family heirlooms. Everything we had was secondhand or from discount stores. "And yet here you are, drawn to an old-fashioned craft that's all about creating heirlooms," I observed. Casey looked up, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "Maybe that's why your quilt means so much to me. It's the first heirloom quality thing I've ever owned." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Well, now you'll make your own heirlooms, things you can pass down someday." The moment was interrupted by my phone chiming with a text message. I glanced at it, Jennifer, asking if I'd made a decision about downsizing yet. I set the phone aside without answering. "Family?" Casey asked. "My daughter," I confirmed. "She's very eager for me to move into senior living." Casey frowned. "But your house is beautiful, and you seem perfectly capable of living independently." "Thank you for noticing," I said dryly. "Unfortunately, my family sees me as increasingly obsolete. The house is just real estate to theme an asset to be liquidated." Casey shook her head in disbelief. "I can't imagine. If my mom had a house like this with all this history," she gestured around the kitchen, "I'd be fighting to help her stay in it as long as possible." Her words warmed me, though they also highlighted the painful contrast with my own family's attitude. We finished our meal talking about lighter topics: Casey's classes, her dreams of opening her own bakery someday, the latest book I was reading for my Thursday book club. When she finally left, promising to practice her cutting techniques before next Wednesday, I stood on the porch watching her drive away, feeling oddly energized despite the long day. Inside, I finally responded to Jennifer's text. "Still considering options. Will let you know when I decide." Then I went to my sewing room and began working on a special projecta small wall hanging using some of the same fabrics Casey had chosen for her quilt. Something to give her when she completed her first project, a tangible connection between her work and mine. The week passed quickly. I had lunch with Barbara on Friday, met with a financial advisor on Monday to discuss my retirement accounts, and spent Tuesday morning in the garden, clearing the last of the summer vegetables and preparing the beds for winter. When Wednesday arrived again, I was surprised to hear the doorbell at noon 2 hours before Quilting Circle was scheduled to begin. I opened the door to find Casey standing there, her face flushed with excitement. "I know I'm super early," she said in a rush of words, "but I couldn't wait. I finished cutting all my squares and I even pieced together 2 blocks. I wanted to show you before everyone else got here to make sure I did it right." I laughed, charmed by her enthusiasm, and ushered her in. "Let's see what you've done." In my sunroom, Casey carefully removed 2 completed 9-patch blocks from her bag. The stitching was remarkably even for a beginner, the corners matching with only minor imperfections. She'd arranged the fabrics to create a pattern that suggested stars against a night sky, just as she'd described. "Casey, these are wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed. "You have a natural eye for composition." She beamed under the praise. "I stayed up until 2 in the morning working on them. I couldn't stop once I started. It's kind of addictive." "Don't I know it?" I agreed. Many a night I've told myself, just one more block, and suddenly it's dawn. Since she was so early, I offered to help her lay out the rest of her blocks before the others arrived. We spread her cut squares on the large table, arranging and rearranging them to find the most pleasing pattern. "The trick is to create movement and balance," I explained. "You want the eye to travel across the quilt, not get stuck in one spot." Casey nodded seriously, taking photos of each arrangement with her phone before settling on a final design. "This one," she decided. "It reminds me of constellations." We had just finished pinning paper numbers to each square to maintain the arrangement when Sarah arrived, followed shortly by the others. They crowded around Casey's work, offering praise and gentle suggestions. "You've got a quilter soul," May declared after examining Casey's 2 completed blocks. "Some people never get their points this precise, even after years of practice." The compliment brought a flush of pleasure to Casey's cheeks. For the next 2 hours, the sunroom hummed with activity, the snip of scissors, the whir of my old sewing machine as Casey pieced together more blocks, the comfortable chatter of women sharing their lives along with their craft. I sat at my own machine, working on the wall hanging I was making for Casey, listening to the conversations flowing around me. May was describing her grandson's college applications. Luann was sharing recipes for Thanksgiving sides. Sarah was showing photos from her recent trip to Asheville. Ordinary moments, ordinary conversations. Yet, as I looked around the circle, I was struck by the simple beauty of it all, women of different generations, different backgrounds, connected by the work of their hands. Casey fitting in as if she'd always been there, offering opinions on color choices, listening intently to Barbara's stories about quilting during the energy crisis of the 1970s. This, I thought, is what I would miss if I moved to Golden Sunset Acres. Not just the house itself, but this community I'd built, this circle that now included a bright young woman who valued the very traditions my own grandchildren dismissed. When Quilting Circle ended, Casey lingered again, helping me clean up and asking if she could see some of my other quilts, the ones not currently on display. I led her upstairs to the guest room, where a cedar chest similar to the one I'd given her held some of my earliest works. "This one I made when I was expecting Jennifer," I said, unfolding a baby quilt with faded yellow ducks parading across a blue background. "And this one was for my parents' 40th anniversary." Casey handled each quilt reverently, admiring the stitching, asking questions about techniques. When we came to a particularly elaborate star quilt in shades of red and white, She gasped. "This is incredible," she said, tracing one of the intricate star points with her finger. "How long did this take you?" "Almost 2 years, working off and on," I admitted. "I made it for my 30th wedding anniversary. Frank and I took it on a picnic to the place where he proposed." Casey looked up, her expression soft. "That's so romantic." I smiled at the memory. Frank wasn't a particularly romantic man in the conventional sense. He never bought me jewelry or wrote poems. But he built my garden beds with his own hands, and every winter he warmed my side of the bed before I got in. That's real romance, I think, the quiet acts of care. Casey nodded thoughtfully. "My mom always said you can tell what a person really values by where they put their time, not their money." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," I said. "She is," Casey agreed. "I should call her more often." She carefully refolded the star quilt and returned it to the chest. "Thank you for showing me these. It's like seeing pieces of your life." "That's exactly what they are," I told her. "Pieces of life, stitched together." After Casey left, I sat in my favorite chair by the living room window, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that would have made a beautiful quilt amber and rose in deepening purple. I thought about the quilts I'd shown her, each one a chapter in my life's story. And I thought about Jennifer and my grandchildren, who saw this house as nothing more than an asset, these quilts as nothing more than outdated decor. The contrast made my path forward suddenly clear. That evening, I called my friend Diane, who worked in real estate. "I need your advice," I told her. "Not about selling, at least not yet, but about my options." We talked for nearly an hour about possibilities. I hadn't considered renting out rooms to generate income, creating a formal quilting studio that could host classes, even converting part of the house into a small gallery for local fiber artists. "The point is, Eleanor," Diane said, "this house can evolve with you, just like you've evolved throughout your life. You don't have to make a binary choice between staying exactly as you are or selling completely." Her words resonated with me long after we hung up. Evolution, not abandonment. Adaptation, not surrender. The next morning, I called a local contractor who had done work for several friends. I arranged for him to come assess the house to see what modifications might make aging in place more feasible. Perhaps a first-floor master suite conversion, upgrades to make the bathroom safer, improvements to the heating system. I was sitting on the porch with my morning tea, making notes about potential changes, when a sleek silver SUV pulled into my driveway. Jennifer stepped out, her expression a mixture of determination and exasperation. "Mom," she said, climbing the porch steps, "you haven't been answering my texts." "Good morning to you too," I replied calmly. "Would you like some tea?" She sighed, but took the chair next to mine. "I brought more information about Golden Sunset Acres," she said, pulling a folder from her purse. "They're having an open house this weekend. I thought we could go together." I set my teacup down carefully. "Jennifer, I've been doing a lot of thinking this past week. I've made some decisions I'd like to share with you." She looked wary but nodded for me to continue. "I'm not moving to Golden Sunset Acres," I said firmly. "I'm staying in my home, but I am making some changes." "Mom," she began, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. I've spoken with a contractor about modifications to make aging in place safer and more comfortable. I'm also exploring options for using this house in new ways, possibly renting a room to a student, or converting part of it into a proper quilting studio where I could teach classes." Jennifer stared at me, clearly taken aback by my decisiveness. "You want to rent to a stranger? Mom, that's not safe at your age." "I'm 73, not 103, I reminded her. "And people have housemates at all ages. It would provide additional income and some company." "Is this because of that girl, Sarah's niece?" Jennifer asked, her voice sharpening. Mom, you barely know her. You can't restructure your entire life around some random young person who showed interest in your quilts. I took a deep breath, determined to stay calm. This isn't about Casey specifically, though yes, meeting her did help clarify some things for me. This is about recognizing that I still have value, Jennifer. My skills, my knowledge, my home, they all have value. I'm not ready to be packed away to a retirement community just because it would be more convenient for you. Jennifer flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. I'm worried about your safety, your quality of life. Are you? I asked gently. Or are you worried about having to deal with this house and everything in it after I'm gone? She looked away, her silence confirming what I'd suspected. Jennifer, I continued, softening my tone. I understand that my things, the quilts, the family photos, the books might seem like a burden to you. They represent a way of life that's different from yours, but that doesn't make them worthless. I never said they were worthless, she protested weakly. Not in those words, I acknowledged, but actions speak too. When was the last time you or the kids showed genuine interest in anything I've created? When Tyler and Brittany rejected that quilt, it wasn't just about their design preferences, it was about rejecting connection to family history, to tradition. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I didn't realize it meant that much to you. How could you not know? I asked, more bewildered than angry. Jennifer, I've spent thousands of hours creating things for this family. Things meant to be used, cherished, passed down. How could you think that didn't matter deeply to me? She looked down at her hands. I guess I thought, I don't know, that it was just a hobby, something to keep you busy. The disconnect between us had never felt so vast. How had I raised a daughter who understood me so little? Or perhaps the question was, how had I failed to show her what really mattered to me? Well, I said finally, now you know, and knowing that, I hope you can respect my decision to stay here, in my home, continuing the work that gives my life meaning. Jennifer nodded slowly. I still think you should consider Golden Sunset Acres, but I understand it's your decision. She hesitated, then added, would you at least come see it with me? Just to know all your options? It was a small olive branch. I decided to accept it. I'll go to the open house with you, I agreed, but I'm not making any promises. She seemed relieved. That's all I'm asking. We sat in slightly uncomfortable silence for a few minutes before Jennifer asked, so, this Casey person, she's really that interested in learning to quilt? She is, I confirmed. She has a natural talent for it too. She reminds me a little of you when you were young, before you decided quilting was too old-fashioned. Jennifer had the grace to look embarrassed. I was a teenager. Everything parents do seems mortifyingly uncool at that age. And now? I asked. Is it still mortifyingly uncool? She considered the question. Not uncool exactly, just not part of my world. I don't have time for handmade things, Mom. Between work and the kids and everything else, I can barely keep up with laundry, let alone make a quilt. I understand that, I told her. Our lives are different, but different doesn't have to mean disconnected. Jennifer nodded, though I wasn't sure she truly understood. We finished our tea with lighter conversation, her work, Tyler's new job, Madison's latest boyfriend. When she left, promising to pick me up for the open house on Saturday, I felt we'd reached a fragile truce, if not a true understanding. The rest of the week passed in a flurry of activity. The contractor came on Thursday, walking through the house with me and discussing possible modifications. To my relief, he confirmed that the structure was sound and that several fairly minor changes could make the house much more age-friendly. A walk-in shower with grab bars, some ramps instead of the single steps at the entryways, perhaps a stairlift for later if needed. he suggested. Nothing that would fundamentally alter the character of the home. I scheduled a follow-up appointment for him to prepare a proper estimate and felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was my home, and I could adapt it to my changing needs rather than abandoning it entirely. On Friday, I received an unexpected text from Casey. "Made something for you, can I drop it by tomorrow morning?" Curious, I replied that I'd be home until 11 when Jennifer was picking me up for the Golden Sunset Acres open house. Casey texted back that she'd come by at 9. When the doorbell rang the next morning, I opened it to find Casey holding a large bakery box and practically bouncing with excitement. "I made this for you," she said, carefully placing the box on my kitchen table. "My first solo project at the bakery. The owner's been letting me experiment when we're not busy." I opened the box to find a beautiful cake, decorated with intricate buttercream flowers in the exact colors of the wedding ring quilt. I'd given her blues and creams swirling in patterns that unmistakably echoed the quilt design. "Casey," I breathed, "this is amazing. You've quilted with frosting." She beamed at my reaction. "That's exactly what I was trying to do. I wanted to thank you for everything, the quilt, the lessons, just being so welcoming to me." My mom always says gratitude should be as creative as the gift that inspired it. I was deeply touched, not just by the cake itself, though it was truly a work of art, but by the thought behind it. Casey had taken the tradition I'd shared with her and translated it into her own medium, creating something that bridged our different worlds. "I don't know what to say except thank you," I told her. "This must have taken hours." "About 7, she admitted with a laugh. "But it was worth it to see your face just now." We cut into the cake vanilla with lemon curd between the layers and sat at my kitchen table enjoying thick slices with coffee. Casey told me about her classes, her work at the bakery, her dreams of having her own place someday. "The owner's been talking about retiring in a few years," she confided. "She's hinted that she might consider selling to an employee if they could get financing together." "That's a wonderful opportunity," I said. "Have you looked into small business loans?" Casey nodded. "A little, but it's intimidating. The amount I'd need seems impossible on my current income." "Well," I said, "my late husband was a banker. I still have some of his books on small business financing. You're welcome to borrow them if you'd like." "Really, that would be amazing!" Her enthusiasm was contagious. We were still chatting when Jennifer's SUV pulled into the driveway an hour earlier than planned. I saw her do a double take at Casey's small, beat-up Honda parked at the curb. "That must be your daughter," Casey said, glancing out the window. "I should probably go." "Nonsense," I replied. "Stay and finish your coffee. I'd like you to meet her." Jennifer looked surprised when I opened the door with Casey beside me. "You're early," I observed. "The realtor called and asked if we could come at 10 instead," Jennifer explained, her eyes darting curiously to Casey. "I tried to call, but you didn't answer." "My phone is charging in the bedroom," I said. "Jennifer, this is Casey, Sarah's niece. Casey, my daughter Jennifer." Casey extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's so nice to meet you. Your mom has been teaching me to quilt." Jennifer shook her hand, her expression polite but reserved. "How nice. Mom mentioned she'd given you Tyler's quilt." If Casey noticed the slight edge in Jennifer's voice, she didn't show it. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," she said earnestly. "I've been sleeping under it every night. It's like being wrapped in a work of art." Jennifer's expression softened slightly at Casey's genuine appreciation. "Mom does beautiful work," she acknowledged. "She made a cake," I said, leading them both back to the kitchen. "Look at the decoration, it's inspired by the quilt pattern." Jennifer examined the cake with genuine surprise. "That's really impressive," she admitted. "You're a professional baker?" "Working on it," Casey said. "I'm at Maple Street Bakery downtown while I finish my business degree." "My son Tyler's wife loves that place," Jennifer said, making the connection. They live in the new apartments nearby. The conversation flowed more easily after that, finding points of connection. When Casey finally left, promising to text me about borrowing Frank's business books, Jennifer watched her drive away with a thoughtful expression. "She seems nice," she said carefully, "very enthusiastic about your quilting." "She is," I agreed. "And it's not just politeness. She's genuinely interested in learning the craft, in connecting with the tradition." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "It bothers you that the kids aren't interested in the quilts, doesn't it? More than you've let on." I considered deflecting, but decided honesty was more important. "Yes," I admitted. "It does. Not because I expect everyone to love quilting, but because these aren't just blankets, Jennifer. They're pieces of our family history. When Tyler and the others dismiss them as too traditional or not their aesthetic, they're dismissing that history, dismissing me." Jennifer looked stricken. "Mom, I'm sure they don't mean it that way." "Perhaps not consciously," I allowed, "but the effect is the same." We were both quiet for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings filling the space between us. "We should get going," Jennifer finally said. "The realtor is expecting us." The Golden Sunset Acres open house was exactly what I'd expected, a carefully orchestrated presentation designed to make aging seem like an extended cruise vacation. The model apartment was tastefully bland. The common areas were filled with smiling seniors, playing cards and doing water aerobics, and the sales pitch emphasized safety, convenience, and freedom from home maintenance worries. I went through the motions, asking appropriate questions about costs and services, nodding at the right moments. But my mind kept drifting back to my own home, to the sunroom filled with fabric and friends, to the garden Frank had built, to the kitchen where Casey and I had shared cake and conversation just hours before. When the tour ended, Jennifer turned to me expectantly. "Well, what do you think?" "It's very nice," I said diplomatically, "for someone who needs this level of support." "But not for you," she concluded, reading my expression. "Not for me," I confirmed. "Not now, and hopefully not for many years to come." To my surprise, Jennifer didn't argue. "I figured that's what you'd say," she said with a small smile. "You've always been stubborn." "I preferred determined," I replied. She laughed, a genuine sound that reminded me of her childhood. "All right, determined. So what's your plan?" As we drove home, I outlined what I discussed with the contractor: the modifications to make the house safer, the possibility of a housemate, or converting part of the space into a teaching studio. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jennifer said when I finished, "about the quilts being family history. I never really looked at it that way before." "How did you see them?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I guess, as projects, things that kept you busy. I never thought about how much of yourself you put into them." "Every stitch," I told her. She nodded slowly. "I think I understand that better now, seeing how that Casey girl responded to them. The way she looks at your work, it's how I should have been looking at it all along." It was an admission I hadn't expected, and it touched me deeply. "It's never too late to start," I said gently. Jennifer glanced at me quickly, then back at the road. "Would you maybe show me how? Not a whole quilt. I really don't have time for that, but perhaps something small. A table runner or a pillow cover." The request took me by surprise. "You want to learn to quilt?" "Maybe not the whole craft," she clarified, "but enough to understand it better, to connect with that part of you." It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning, a stitch in the tear that had formed between us. "I'd like that very much," I told her. When we pulled up to my house, Casey's Honda was back in the driveway. "She's persistent," Jennifer observed, but without the edge that had been in her voice earlier. We found Casey on the porch swing, a notebook open on her lap, scribbling furiously. Sorry to just show up, she said, standing quickly. I had an idea for my business plan and remembered you mentioned those books your husband had. Of course, I said. Come in, both of you. As I led them inside, I felt an unexpected sense of rightness, me daughter, and this young woman who had so unexpectedly become part of my life, both under my roof at the same time. Different generations, different perspectives, but connected through me. In my study, I found Frank's old business books and handed them to Casey. Take your time with these, I told her. They're not doing any good sitting on my shelf. Thank you so much, she said, handling the books reverently. I'll take good care of them. I know you will, I said. Just like the quilt. Jennifer watched our exchange with a thoughtful expression. After Casey left with the books and a promise to bring them back whenever, Jennifer helped me prepare a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches. She really admires you, Jennifer observed as we ate. I can see why you've taken to her. She reminds me that what I know still has value, I admitted, that the traditions I care about don't have to die with me. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry if I've made you feel obsolete. That was never my intention. I know, I assured her. You were concerned about my well-being. But sometimes in trying to keep people safe, we forget to let them live. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that better now. She hesitated, then added, The kids are coming for dinner next Sunday. Would you join us? Maybe bring one of your quilts? Something with family history that you could tell them about. The invitation and the specific request caught me by surprise. I'd like that, I said carefully. Do you think they'd be interested? Jennifer sighed. Honestly, I don't know. But they should be. And maybe seeing it through new eyes like, I'm trying to help them understand too. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was an opening a willingness to try that hadn't been there before. I'll bring the double wedding ring quilt my grandmother made for my parents, I decided. The one with a story about the hidden pocket. Jennifer's eyes lit up. I remember that one. Didn't great-grandma hide a silver dollar in it? A Liberty dollar from 1921, I confirmed, pleased she remembered, as a symbol of prosperity in hard times. See? Jennifer said with a small smile. Some traditions did stick with me. After she left, I spent the afternoon in my sewing room, working on the wall hanging for Casey. As my needle moved through the fabric, I thought about the unexpected turns my life had taken in just 2 weeks, from the painful rejection of Tyler's quilt to finding a new student in Casey. From Jennifer's pressure to move to her tentative interest in learning about quilting herself. Nothing had been resolved completely. My grandchildren might still find quilts hopelessly old-fashioned. The contractor's estimate might make some of my planned modifications impossible. Jennifer might decide after one lesson that quilting wasn't for her after all. But something fundamental had shifted. I had remembered my own value. I had found new purpose in passing on what I knew. And most importantly, I had refused to be packed away before my time. On Wednesday, Quilting Circle gathered in my sunroom as usual. Casey arrived with fresh pastries and 3 more completed blocks, eager to show everyone her progress. At this rate, you'll have your first quilt finished by Christmas, May observed, inspecting Casey's neat stitches. Just in time to start planning the next one, Barbara added with a wink. I watched Casey settle into our circle, already belonging, already part of this tradition that stretched back through generations of women's hands. I thought about Jennifer's invitation and her request to bring a quilt with family history. Small steps, tiny stitches, but together, they were creating a new pattern I couldn't fully see yet, but that I trusted would emerge with time and care. Outside, the October light slanted golden through the maple leaves. Frank's tree, planted when Jennifer was born, now tall and strong, its roots deep in the soil of this place we'd made our home. The roots of tradition were just as deep, I realized, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be valued again. And as I guided my needle through fabric, joining pieces that would become a gift for Casey, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my purpose, to be the thread between past and future, connecting what had been to what might yet be. Later that evening, I called Jennifer to confirm our Sunday dinner plans and to tell her I'd found a pattern for a simple table runner she might like to try. She sounded genuinely pleased. "I was thinking," she said before we hung up, "maybe we could look at your contractor's estimate together when it comes in. 2 heads are better than 1 for big decisions like that." It was an olive branch acknowledgement that while she still had concerns about my living situation, she was willing to work with my wishes rather than against them. "I'd appreciate that," I told her sincerely. After we said goodbye, I went to the cedar chest in my bedroom and carefully lifted out my grandmother's double wedding ring quilt, the one I would bring to Sunday's dinner. The fabrics were faded now, the stitches softened by decades of washing, but the craftsmanship was still evident in every carefully pieced ring. I ran my fingers over the hidden pocket where my grandmother had sewn in the silver dollar her silent message of hope during the hardest of times. "For prosperity," she'd told my mother, "so you'll never know want." Different generations express love in different ways. My grandmother had sewn protection and hope into fabric. My daughter expressed concern through brochures for retirement communities. My grandchildren valued sleek modernity over handmade tradition. And Casey? Casey reminded me that traditions only die if we let them, if we fail to adapt them, to share them, to make them meaningful for new generations. I carefully refolded the quilt, thinking about Sunday dinner. Perhaps my grandchildren would still roll their eyes. Perhaps the story of the hidden dollar would seem quaint rather than powerful to them. But I would tell it anyway, and I would continue teaching Casey and anyone else who wanted to learn. I would adapt my home to my changing needs rather than abandoning it. I would find new ways to use my skills, new people to share them with. Because, in the end, that's what keeping tradition alive really means, not preserving it unchanged like a museum piece, but allowing it to evolve, to grow, to find new soil in which to root. And as I placed the quilt back in the cedar chest, I felt my grandmother's presence not as a ghost, but as a thread in the fabric of my own life, connecting me to all those who had come before and all those who would come after. A continuous thread, unbroken. Like the best traditions always are.